Welcome, my friends, to the podcast that never ends, where we gather our clan and talk about peace and love in our lives, the difficulties along the journey, and how we rise up. We will experience a little thing I call Kluberty together, find our sweet spot, and planting our seeds to watch them grow in our magic garden. I'm Uncle Dave, and our transformation starts right here. Hey now, and how are you doing? Want to welcome you to the next episode of Peace, Love, and Bring a Bat. Today's guest, Yarona. I can't wait you guys to know her, to know about parenting skills, life skills. We're going to learn so much in this time. It's going to be so exciting. How are you doing today, my friend?
I am doing wonderfully. It is a Monday and the skies are blue.
Hey, can't get better than that, or at least they're blue for a little while. Today's the day, the oh my God, hopefully the world will see anything past this eclipse, which is going to be 3 minutes. Somebody asked me last night about the eclipse, and they're like, how long is it going to be? I go, it takes about 2 hours, but it's really a 3 minute process. I go, like almost like, and I'm like, really? I don't know. They're calling it the National Guard. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Like, what do they think is going to happen?
I'm
So,
sure.
but
That's
so
a
we were
good
talking
question.
actually in the green room. We can lean that into how people put so much energy into one event and then the importance of it or lack of importance of it.
Yeah. I have this thought process always, especially in these days, that when something is happening in the moment, the best way to be fully engaged is to be absolutely present with the moment as it is and not make projections about what could be or look back and say, I did something wrong there, but just be fully engaged in the moment. And it's interesting because when you are fully engaged in the moment, usually things do end up working out. And when they don't, there's a lesson to be had in that. So I think it's really important. Obviously, we need to take certain precautionary measures, but there's one thing between taking precautionary measures and there's another thing between making a big to do about potentially nothing. And so there's some balance in between. And recently I've been talking a lot about the difference between balance versus the extremes. I think life is all about finding how to walk the balance. And it's interesting because we're not ever going to walk a straight line of balance. We're often going to weave back and forth over that. But the closer we can maintain to the middle point, the better off we are. Because balance to me is a lot about seeing a variety of complexities going on all at once and being able to absorb that and allowing for the possibility of everything. So, for instance, with parenting, some things that I see where parents beat themselves up when they've done something that they are like, I wish I hadn't done that. I wish we hadn't spent the entire day watching TV. I was feeling lazy and I was this and I was that. And I just couldn't get myself to get my kids going and I just didn't want to. And then they feel bad about it. And I think one of the things in balance is recognizing that we all have those moments and those give and takes. As long as you're not stuck in any one particular way, where you're not in a constant, okay, we have to make the most out of today, has to be the most productive day, and it has to be, we have to do.
Mm-hmm.
Or the other side, which is where just there's a lack of it's total procrastination, total just, okay, today is just going to be a blow off day, and every day becomes a blow off day. I think there is to walk the middle line of that is to acknowledge that you can have all of those things rather than an either or situation. I think that allows for you to find the balance and flow back and forth between the balance.
Yeah, I think that's a huge piece. But let me take a step back because while I introduce you, let's tell a little bit about you and what you do. I don't want to dismiss
Sure.
that, and then we can get more balance on all the other things we're going to talk about.
I appreciate that. I always forget about those things. To me, the conversation is everything. And so my background is less consequential than the conversation in and of itself. But I will tell you about me. I have spent 17 years and counting in the fields of early childhood, human development, psychology, and coaching. And over the course of time, I've veered away from the traditional sense of I used to work for the state and federal program and then moved. And then I switched course and I said, you know what? you hit a certain ceiling sometimes when there's federal and state policies and
Mm.
procedures and guidelines. And I think it's a beautiful thing. I think guidelines are necessary. So I don't discount them. I think that's really great. But I kept hitting a specific ceiling that I was frustrated by. And in order to get past that, I said, you know what? I'm going to jump deeper into being my own boss. And I jumped off the deep end and went into entrepreneurship and so, or solopreneurship, depending on what you want to call it. And have been building my programs and building out a whole slew of different things. And in the interim, I did a TEDx talk. I've spoken on world stages. I also have co-authored 2 books, and I'm currently writing a parenting book. And primarily my focus is in the parenting field. However, I also have realized something, and I started to move into the field of speaker coaching work. Because one of the things after I became a TEDx speaker, I started to notice that the way people believe they need to communicate is often based off of, I just need to say the perfect words. And the reality is, that's not how we communicate. With my knowledge of human development and brain development, I understand that communication is actually 70 to 90%. That's the statistics, although some people actually think it's higher than that, upwards of 93%. But communication is 70 to 90% on average nonverbal, which means that there's a lot going on that is unspoken. And that is what people pick up. And interestingly, I see that happen on the parent side, but I also see that happen in leadership roles, in people who are CEOs and executives and people from mass levels of expertise. When I was in college, some of the most distinguished professors were terrible teachers. And the reason they were terrible teachers is they did not know how to communicate. So I realized that with my knowledge, I could put that into speaker coaching work. And I became a certified speaker coach. And I now work with a lot of people to land and deliver their own TEDx talks and keynotes and all sorts of lectures and wherever, whatever platform may be, because communication does function differently on different platforms.
For sure. Yeah. Here, this is a platform. It's a more personal, it's a one-on-one conversation. And we need to work on that also, how we do it, because how we talk and the opportunities, how the other person hears it, or how we hear the other person talking when they speak with us, right? That active listening pieces are so important as part of communication, but also understanding where they are. I mean, when you're coaching or mentoring, you have to meet the person where they're at, not where you want them to be.
Exactly. We apply the platinum rule, which is more about empathy, learning what they need in order to be able to give them what they best need. So, something I try to get my clients to understand too is that it's not about being someone you're not. I always try to emphasize that. I'm never going to ask you to be a different parent. I'm never going to ask you to be a different speaker. I'm never going to ask you to be anything you're not. What I'm going to get you to do is learn the behavioral skill of communication and practice that skill, because it is a behavioral skill. It's a learned developmental skill. We have certain instinctual communication modes, but as we go and move through life, we learn communication from the environment around us, from our experiences, and some portions of it are already innately components of our personality. And so then we take that and we can modify it. And again, it's not about changing ourselves. It's actually just about changing our skill. I don't want to be anyone other than me. I'm not going to be David. You're not going to be Yarona. We're not going to be one another. But what we can do is take the skills we have and really tweak and refine them. Imagine if you were a lover of pianos, and from the time you were young, you were musically inclined and you loved tinkering on a piano. You're not just going to turn around and go out and do a concerto. You need to be able to practice that skill. You may already be innately inclined to it. And so again, same thing with communication. Some people are naturally born with a better ability to communicate than others, but everyone can refine that skill. Everyone. Where
Good, right? I mean, wouldn't you say that even if you have that skill, that's where I talk and do similar work, in that you got to be who you are, on and off, because then it becomes easy, right? Like we tell our kids, you don't have to remember a story. If you lied, You then have to remember a story. You have to work harder. I go, and the same thing in business. If we communicate or when we communicate ourselves exactly who we are, for better or for worse, the right people will still come to us, but it's knowing that and aligning ourselves with really the brand and the person who we want to become. That's why the first conversations I have with a client are about who are you? Don't tell me your story. We'll get to that, how we're going to use your story for your greater good. But who are you and why are you like this? And not in a bad way, right? So I think it's all good. Even when you become different ways, there's a different way to approach it.
Absolutely. And we can learn from what we know and we can learn from what we don't know, but sometimes we don't know what we don't yet know.
Right.
And therefore, that's the tongue twister. And therefore, though, it's so important to look to people who can give us those skills. And I believe that there are hundreds of not thousands of people out there who have something that they can give to other people. It's really that they're up to them to decide whether or not they want to give it. But one of the things that I guess I get frustrated with is the scarcity mindset when it comes to being of a certain caliber. I believe that I work with other speaker coaches here and there, and everybody speaks to everybody differently. And that means that I'm not going to necessarily be the best coach for every single person. And I may want to say, hey, you should go to this person. You should go to this person. Because the people that I work best with who can really up level their skills, those people come to me. They find me. Believe me, they find me these days a lot, which is a beautiful
Well, which
thing.
is awesome, right?
Yeah.
That's the goal, and not everybody's for each other, and
Yeah.
not. But that's where a lot of coaches and mentors and people are like, if your owner doesn't want to work with Dave, oh my God, I have to get her to work with me because.
Yeah.
But there's a million people out there, and have that confidence within ourselves to say,
Yeah.
hey, your owner doesn't want to work with me, or Dave doesn't want to work with your owner. That doesn't mean I can actually give you, hey, Yarona, I know somebody who I think would work better with you. Dave, I
Exactly.
think there's somebody who would work
Yeah.
rather than me. And that's the connection. That's
Yeah.
more important than anything else. That's why when I work with, and they go, what's your biggest marketing tool? I go, word of mouth. And
Yeah.
people like always look at me, oh, so you don't have that many clients. I'm like, no, I did. But it's one of those things. It's how you go about it doing it and the confidence level behind it.
Yes, absolutely. And I think I'm just going to hit that nail on the head one more time because I think this is really important for people in any field you're in. There are always going to be people who are in that similar field. Yet, here's the thing, when we lift one another up, when we really help one another, that field is lifted up. And the more that field gets lifted up, the more I know you and I both understand this being in the coaching field, it feels like it's just there's so many coaches out there. It feels like it. Whatever field you're in, oftentimes feels like it because you're in it and therefore you're aware of it and you're getting information that's fed to you here and there and everywhere. So it feels like it's all around you. And you're like, when that happens, your ego and imposter syndrome start to have a fight.
Yep.
And they're like, I've got to be better than that person. And I've got to be better than that person and that person because how am I going to get the clients? But there are billions of people out there who need you in your field. So running away because you're afraid that you don't compete well with others, imposter syndrome, or trying to beat other people down, ego, is going to end up driving people away from you regardless.
Yep.
But when we actually focus on the field itself and we say, here's the thing, the information we have in this field of knowledge in this area needs to be provided to more people. We know that. I feel like in this day and age, I'm like, I see coaches everywhere, and some people are still like, oh, what do you do? Oh, can you tell me a little bit more about that? And every once in a while, when I meet somebody who doesn't really know what coaching is, I'm freshly reminded that there are very few people out there who are actually successful coaches. And we need to make more coaches succeed. And here's the reason why. There are always going to be more people in the world who need help than there are helpers to help them. So it doesn't really matter what field you're in. Understand there's always going to be a need.
Yep.
You can be a supermarket employee, and I think that's a wonderful thing. There are always going to need to be people in a supermarket because we need the stores restocked. We need cashiers who can help you. We need people in every line of work. but yet people belittle it and they place more value on one thing over another thing. And I'm like, you know what? There's so much value here, there, and everywhere. And I think the minute we start actually looking for the value rather than the deficits, that's when we see the benefit of having such a vast array of different fields that we can all be in and be a part
For
of.
sure, especially in the coaching field. Everybody's trying to be the number one this. I'm like, I remember raising my hand one time. I'm like, I think I want to be number six. Is that okay? And people were like, what? I'm like, I go, because then for me, I've already achieved a level of success, but I'm not where I want to be. So I'm going to keep growing, but it's okay where I'm at.
Yeah.
And they're like, wow. I'm like, yeah, it's okay to be number two. It's okay
Yeah.
to be number six. And having that communication with yourself, again, I've been in lots of groups where I want to make $1 million. I go, how have you ever made six figures? No. Okay, so that's a big G. Not that you can't do it, but why don't you be more realistic of where you're at and what you'd like to achieve?
Yes.
And when we communicate that to ourselves, it becomes powerful. And sometimes you get to surprise ourselves, and the universe will multiply. They know what's in your heart, and that's where the power really comes into it.
Yeah, I love that. And it's interesting. We used to say this all the time, but I'm stepping back from saying this. Where do you want to be in 5 years' time? Where do you want to be in 10 years' time? Da, 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 da. I just try to get people these days to ask themselves, where do you want to be tomorrow? Where do you want to be next week? That's it. Just look at the progress as a daily occurrence. If you can make some minor thing of progress, because here's the thing, if you say, I want to be a millionaire, and currently you're making maybe, I don't know, 10, 20, $30,000, not much, or you're making 40, 50, 60, that's okay. But the question becomes, what are the little steps? Because you can't snap your fingers and be an overnight millionaire. It doesn't happen. And people, and I know that the lottery is there. I'm not a gambler. I would rather see progress in real time. But in order to see it in real time, we can't project out from 5 years from now. We need to know the tiny little minutia of steps we need to take, which means progress should be occurring in a daily functionality. It shouldn't be occurring for a year from now, I want to do this. Now you can do that. You can say, okay, here's my year target, right? Okay, but then start breaking it down. Here's my quarter one, quarter two, quarter three, quarter four targets. Okay, break it down. Keep breaking it down until you get the daily
Yep.
pieces. And then your focus should be retained and maintained on the daily pieces. Because if your focus keeps shifting outward, you're not going to get the daily things done in order for you to get to that outward place.
Yeah. Yeah, and definitely enjoy it. And I always say every now and then, as you're climbing up your mountain, look back to see how far you've come. That and if you've not, if you're flatlined and that you're just doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, then we need to retool that as well. And I know parenting is one of your specialties. So
Yes.
how would you do as a parent? It's really hard being a parent as a parent of teenage girls as they're going out on their own in college as well as younger. How can you reward them in learning like where they're at and with their failures to see the growth?
Okay. So, well, I'll say parenting is also a daily thing.
Yeah.
And we can't snap our fingers and immediately say, I want my child to be, I want my child to have no more tantrums. That's impossible. Your child isn't a robot.
Mhm.
You can't program them. We, as adults, first, it takes recognition in ourselves. We all have good days and bad days. Guess what? That means your child is going to have good days and bad days. So once you can get to a place of accepting, they're going to have good days and bad days. If you focus too heavily on the bad days, they actually can feel that.
Mhm.
And what happens is they need more recognition. I hate to say awards, but they need more recognition and they need more awareness of the good days. And they need specific awareness of those good days. So, for instance, if your child had a great day and no tantrums, play that up, focus on that. You did really fantastic today. You had a lovely play day and be specific. Don't just say, you were wonderful today, but be specific. I noticed that today you went with everything and you were able to move from one activity to the next and you played really well with your friends and you this and that and the other. constantly helping them be aware of the good and the specifics of the good that they've done that day gives them what they're actually craving, which is your attention. So children are natural attention seekers. They will look for the attention that they get because it's actually a behavior response mechanism. They do a particular behavior, they're looking for a response. The response doesn't have to be positive or negative. They just want a response because that's what they're looking for, the attention in the response. So if you are paying more attention to them every time they do a bad thing, guess what's going to happen? You're going to increase the times they do a bad thing.
Well,
And I
that's
don't
one of my
say acting,
questions.
right?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
So let me get to that point though, because here's the thing. Giving them that awareness of the good things and less attention when they're doing the bad things helps elevate that. However, I don't believe in reward and punishment. I believe in what I call natural consequential discipline, which is discipline is an internalized mechanism, but we've actually externalized it. Think about internal discipline. You look at a cake and you're like, ooh, I really want cake. Oh, do I need cake? Internal discipline is saying, I had a piece of cake yesterday. I don't need a piece of cake today. What natural consequential discipline does is it helps them build their internalized discipline by showing them what the natural consequences of their actions will be. And you have to have that discussion. Okay, if you choose to do this, here's what could happen. I'm not talking about a punishment. I'm saying if you have, let's say for your daughters, you said they're teenagers, right? If you have a boundary, your house boundary is that everybody is in by so-and-so time, by 9 p.m. Okay. And your child chooses to negate that boundary. They choose to say, I don't care. I'm going to keep being late. Okay. Then the natural consequences are, we can't trust that you have shown us that we can't trust that you're going to respect this boundary. That means that we're going to take this boundary away and you're going to be limited by not being able to go out with your friends. This is not a punishment. This is a direct consequence of the fact that she kept pressing that boundary. Now that boundary gets removed and now you're not going to have the allowance to be able to go out. You have to be in by 6 p.m. And if you're not in by 6 p.m., we're going to go find you and we're going to bring you back in by 6 p.m. until you can prove to us that you can commit to this boundary. And then we'll see about stretching that boundary out. That's not punishment because you're explaining it to them as well. Punishment is when you just randomly say, okay, that's it. You broke the curfew. Therefore, you don't get any TV time. You don't get your tablets taken away, your phone's taken away. There's no direct linkage there. So you need to be able to give them the steps to see where the natural consequences come into play and what the direct linkage is. That's really important.
Yeah, and that you answered my question because that was the recognition versus reward piece that I was
Yes.
going to ask. And we got to recognize the good behaviors and recognize the bad behaviors, but then come up with a plan to say and have that conversation. Going back to communication, how important that is because why is it bad? So if a kid doesn't know, spill the milk. Now I have to clean it up. Why are you frustrated? I've gotten better with that with my girls. Is look, what you did upset me, and let me tell you why it upset me. We had a conversation about this, and you still chose to do whatever you wanted to do, and it didn't work out well, and that's okay. But let's move on so it doesn't happen again. That's the part that we want to break those patterns. And being a generational changer of patterns is also hard for us as parents. It's also worth it. I'll tell my kids the easy comment, I'm doing this for my grandchildren, not for you. And it always shakes them up a little bit. And then we have that conversation, what pattern we would like to have broken.
Yeah.
I am really glad that you're enjoying the show, and I hope you follow us on all the podcast hosting sites, as well as Facebook, Peace, Love, and Bring a Bat, or you can follow me, Uncle Dave, David Chemetsky, at Facebook, Instagram, Clubhouse, and www.davidchemetsky.com. I also would enjoy for you to contact me if you want to just have some feedback. You need somebody to talk to at peacelovebringabat@gmail.com. Love to hear your feedback. Thanks.
And it's really important to also own the mistakes as well.
Sure.
So something I say as a parent is the best thing you can do is own your own mistakes, not just for yourself, but in front of your children. Because if you've made a mistake, let's say they broke a rule. They broke a house rule. They broke curfew and they keep coming back late and you're really angry. And let's say you yell at them. Was it okay for you to yell at them? Probably not. Because here's the thing, we get to control our own emotions, but sometimes they slip away from us. All of us. We're like, okay, I'm going to walk away because I know I'm going to yell. But sometimes that doesn't happen. And your emotion slips away from you and you start yelling about stuff and you're like, and then you catch it. And then you realize, oh, you know what? I shouldn't have yelled. That wasn't the best form of communication here. Yelling doesn't help anything. Since when has anyone ever been yelled at and the other person said, and the person being yelled at says, you know what? You're totally right. You know what?
For the most
Absolutely.
part,
I
that's the
agree
case.
with you. It's very rare that when you're yelling and screaming at your kids that they're going to say, you're right. I'm so sorry. I was so wrong. And da, 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 or just accept it. They might start crying about it, in fact, because now they're feeling guilty and ashamed. Your yelling isn't actually giving them what they need to know in that moment. Let's say you do that. I think it's really important to acknowledge it with them and say, I shouldn't have yelled. That was an inappropriate action for me to take. Because remember, yelling is a behavior. It's your emotions surfacing up in an unhealthy manner. Now, do we all do it? Yeah, absolutely. We all lose our temper every once in a while. Unless you're a Buddhist monk, we all lose our temper every once in a while. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that. And then you show them, okay, I made that mistake. And what happened in that moment? Let's talk it out. And then you have to really investigate it all together. Now, sometimes the thing is, the best thing to do is say, you know what? I am not calm enough right now to talk to you in a rational way. I need time. And you walk away.
Sure.
That is the healthiest thing you can do, because when you're a parent, the one thing you don't have is objectivity. So you need the buffer of time to give you the time to cool down and come back with a little bit more objectivity. Then you can have that conversation. If you start getting heated again, you're like, ooh, wait a second. I realize I'm still mad about this. I think I need to acknowledge that right now. I'm still feeling angered. That means I haven't dealt with it. I haven't figured out how to deal with my anger. But I think one of the most important things you can then do with your kids is, make a plan and understand that sometimes that plan is going to be broken. Sometimes that plan is going to be pushed. Sometimes it's going to be pushed not because of any malicious nature, but simply because the kids forgot. Kids are really terrible with time management. When we're emotionally driven, we're less better capable of time management. So if you're hanging out with your friends, time stops mattering so much. So they may very well have missed curfew simply because they were enjoying their time with their friends. It wasn't malicious. One of the things that I find to be most frustrating for me is to see when parents say, my child was being manipulative. My child, especially like for a 4 or 5-year-old or younger even, oh, you're so manipulative and stuff. That's okay. Manipulation, we are naturally driven to manipulate situations to benefit us the best. And that is a part of our survival mechanism. That's actually a healthy thing. You want to be able to say, I need this environment to be my best, the best environment I can. So manipulation, from a completely just the word in of itself, is not actually super dysfunctional until it becomes maliciously manipulative. And that is the change there. And unfortunately, a lot of parents say their kids are manipulative and they mean maliciously so. And that's a problem, because the truth is, when you go into a conversation with your child, assuming they've manipulated you or they've lied to you on purpose in a malicious manner, you are already going in making them feel small. And that is unhealthy, because a lot of the reasons why children will lie is because they're afraid of the response. So when you can actually respond in a healthy manner, you stop them from lying, because what happens, they build trust with you.
Yep.
So for instance, let's say your girls are how old are they?
They're now almost 19 and 21.
Okay.
We've
So
gone through the
let's say,
teenage years and I got through it, but by the skin of my teeth.
but
Going with this relationship, so I had been married, and the second time I was married, my stepdaughter had done some manipulation. She was just trying to get more attention. And there was one time we had a conversation, and she goes, I lied, and I'm really sorry. You're going to hate me. You're going to this. And I said, no, I love you even more because you told me about that. I think that's the conversation that is so important in, yes, it caused lots of things. And at that time, I was triggered in a lot of different ways. I didn't act properly as an adult, as we said, by yelling. The growth shows what the love we have, and we're able to have those conversations. And now, when I've taken that instance, applied it with my own girls, my biological daughters, then it's become different. That when I do yell, I'm like, okay, I was wrong. There's nothing I can say about being right about raising my voice.
Right.
But this is what is frustrating me into what we're doing. They can understand it as now young adults, as their brains are formulating, and we're trying to have them change. Again, breaking generational patterns. We talked about this a couple of times previously. That's our job as a parent, in my feeling, is breaking. There'll be new patterns, don't worry, but doing our best to break those patterns, adding a huge layer of communication that might not have had before, and better communication.
And here's the thing, you said that you got through by the skin of your teeth, but I think it would be a marvelous world if more parents could learn what I'm trying to teach, which is really about cognitive develop. It's about development. It's learning about the core domains of development. It's learning what you need, the skills you need to engage, because in my opinion, parenting is also a skill and you learn it but most people do it through trial and error. The problem is those errors compound upon themselves if you're not taking active steps and measures to make changes. So here's the thing. When a parent says, I want my child to do this, I don't want them to do this. I don't want them to do this. I don't want them to do this. One thing we can't do is we can't change who our children are, but we can influence them. And this is really important. We need to be able to influence them, not by telling them what not to do, but by telling them what we would like to see.
Show them how to do it. Yeah.
Yes.
Instead of
Not just showing, but also talking to them about what to do instead of what not to do. Instead of saying to a child, don't hit, say, show me your gentle hands. Show me your kind hands. What do your kind hands look like? My son is 6, and so he'll hug me, and I'm like, where are your kind hands? And he'll hug me. And that's really important. And I know a lot of gentle parenting gets a lot of flack, but I think it's because people don't quite understand what gentle parenting really is. It's not about not disciplining your children. And again, I go back to natural consequential discipline. It's not about not giving them boundaries, not telling them no is a beautiful word. And boundaries are necessary because they are the safety net through which we live our lives. I will explain more about that. But one of the things that I see so many parents get wrong with gentle parenting is that they think that means giving into their child's every desire. And that's not gentle parenting. That's permissive parenting. That's just not creating boundaries. So when we tell our children, show me your gentle hands, we're not telling them don't hit, because don't hit boxes them into what can I do with my hands? They don't know yet. So if you keep telling them what not to do, all they do is go, okay, I'll just stand here and do not, I don't,
right.
They want to be able to.
Inaction causes more anxiety, or what do I do? If you just stand there and just look at somebody, it eventually builds up that level.
Exactly. And so what that happens is those bursts of moments where they're doing something we don't want them to do, we need to remind them what they can do, not what they can't, because otherwise they're not being driven towards an objective. That's really important. Driving them towards an objective is more important than telling them just not to go there, because then they don't know where to go. So it's really important that when we focus on our children, it's always, okay, how can I reframe this? If I don't want them to hit, if I don't want them to run the street, what do I want them to do? Ask yourself, if I don't want them to do this, what do I want my child to do? Correct. Okay. If you're playing with a friend and each of you are fighting over a toy, instead of telling them stop fighting and stop fighting over the toy, or taking the toy away from them both, teach them how to share, right? These are all the things we can do. If your kids are coming up to you and they're telling you that somebody's cyberbullying them, what would you want them to do in that circumstance? What would be the healthiest thing for them? Because the other thing is, when they start to interact with other people, dealing with interpersonal boundaries, they're not always going to be able to make a change on the other side, but they can change themselves. They can change how they respond to it. We don't always get a choice in what happens to us, but we can change how we respond to that thing. We can change what we want to do about the thing. and we can look to what we can do. And I think that's really much more important than saying, just don't go online anymore. That's silly. The reality is it's not feasible. However, there are ways to limit contact with the people who are cyberbullying you. There are ways to figure out ways to make yourself feel better. That person is doing something that you take in and feels bad inside of you. Turn to something that makes you feel good about you.
Yep.
Instead of just avoiding the bad, actively engage in the positive. That's a beautiful thing. Now, when it comes to boundaries, though, this is the hardest thing is that I see is people not being aware of what boundaries are in the four realms of boundaries. I talk about four boundaries of living. Our first boundary is our personal boundaries. Now, our personal boundaries are so necessary to craft and create, but more often than not, it's our parents who help us learn what those look like. So if one of our personal boundaries is I'm a person who doesn't like being touched, I don't like physical touch, or I don't like crowds, I don't like going into, no, that's not me, I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
General
But
you.
if I'm a person who, if I don't like crowds, if I don't like small enclosed spaces, if I don't like X, Y, and Z, that's a personal boundary of mine. If I keep stomping over it because I'm forced for whatever the reason is, maybe I shouldn't be pushing myself and crossing my boundaries. One of the things that I find to be hardest is personal boundaries, because I had the ability to establish those when I was younger. So as a result, I don't know always, and I trample my own personal boundaries plenty of times. So then I have to remind myself, oop, Yarona, you're walking on your personal boundary. One of my personal boundaries is my family time is sacred for me. And so when I have situations for work that are crossing my family time, and I'm like, sure, yeah, okay, fine, I'll just do that meeting. I'll just take that meeting and stuff. I feel bad, like I did something wrong for myself and to myself. That's not okay. I need to reestablish that. Now, the second layer of boundaries is interpersonal boundaries. And those are the boundaries we establish within personalized relationships. And they can be any kind of relationships, friendships, partnerships, parent-child relationships, sibling relationships, any of the relationships we establish that are much more within our circles, school, teacher, student development relationships, all of those things where we interact with other people. Even in a store, a supermarket, you've got relationships. Those are interpersonal relationships. Those are probably really hard for a lot of people to establish because they haven't already pre-established their own personal boundaries. But the thing about interpersonal boundaries is that in interpersonal relationships, there's a lot of give and take. And as long as you're not stomping on your own personal boundaries that you've already established and remembering that boundaries do change over time, and that's okay too. You can change your own personal boundaries. If you used to be a very closed off person, but you found that you enjoy certain activities, then in that respect, you're going to be walking outside of the boundary that you normally established. When it comes to interpersonal boundaries, it's probably one of the hardest things to navigate because we don't know how to navigate it in a way that doesn't trample on our own boundaries. And so sometimes we either push back really heavily or we just let people completely walk all over it. This is a balance area. We have to find a balance. And that balance means that we're not walking a perfect midline. We're sometimes going a little bit here and there just to work on those with people. Then we have our third level of boundaries, which are societal boundaries. In this day and age, I see societal boundaries, unfortunately, being stomped all over all the time. And we're constantly trying to reshift those as well. But when you live in a society, you have to expect and respect societal boundaries. There has to be an expectation and a respect of those boundaries, because otherwise you might as well not live in that society. If there is a public health issue, and I'm not going to go too deep into this, but if there is a public health issue and you live as a part of the public mass, you have to accept the fact that there may be some things that you need to do if you want to continue living in that public mass. That's it. It's just a part of it. If you're going into a store and it says no shoes, no shirt, no service, and you are like, I don't want to put on a shirt, that's fine. You don't need to put on a shirt if the outside street is fine with you walking around and not wearing a shirt. But that store has an established rule, and you cannot cross that in a societal circumstance. And that is not okay. I don't want to put on a shirt. You don't have to put on a shirt. You just can't come into the store. And then you've got the final ones. The final boundaries are the natural boundaries that we're all automatically born with, and all of the things that come prior to death. We have natural limitations. You can't jump off of a 20-foot building and fly. It doesn't work that way. And eventually life's inevitable boundary is going to catch up with every single one of us. And we don't know when that boundary will be. But I think it's behooves all of us. We need to be beholden to the understanding that natural boundaries occur, and we need to be ready for those things and accept those things, that there are certain things we can't avoid. And that means having conversations with our family and our loved ones about those boundaries.
Yep.
Right? Because as a parent, you can't guarantee your child, I'm going to be here for a long time. How can you make that guarantee? You can't. So instead of talking about if I die, we need to start talking about when. Here's the information I want you to have. Here's everything. I've created and crafted all this. And actually, in Cracking the Rich Code, in my volume, I specifically wrote that this is the investment every parent needs to change the conversation around death and dying. And the kindest thing you can do for your loved ones is to have a plan that is all written down, that they know about, and that if that plan changes over time, it's all of the updates are there, so that should something happen to you, whether it's something that puts you into a state where you're not dead yet, or whether it's a state where you are in need of permanent care, all of these conversations need to be had.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that's one of the things that we've spoken about before.
Yeah.
In an effort to not take too much of your time. And you've given us so much to think about, so many things. One, and for those who don't know, Cracking the Rich Code, it's a series of books generated by Jim Britt, who's an amazing human being, and Yarona as well. I was in volume 6, and you were in the very successful volume 12. They've all been successful, actually, but I think they went to more countries with this episode, with this edition, than they had ever gone before. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
So how can people contact you?
Yeah, the easiest and best way is to go to my website, footprint.org. I put that on over here, except I forgot the S for HTTP, but it's footprint.org. And that's probably the easiest way. They can also find me on LinkedIn, Yarona Boster. You can definitely find me there. You can find me on Instagram, Yarona Boster 1. You can also find me on Facebook, very rarely, but I'm there every once in a while. But best places are really my website and LinkedIn. I tend to be most all voraciously up in LinkedIn.
Okay. And one other thing, you've given us so many gems and or seeds in our magic garden. Is there one, maybe not even one that you've already mentioned, is there one that you'd like to plant, one further one that you'd like to plant within ourselves to grow in the future?
I think that we're always in search of progress. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And as long as we don't stop asking ourselves, or we're always in pursuit of trying to figure out how to progress ourselves, that's all we can really do. How can you be better than you were yesterday? And if you can keep asking yourself those questions, and some days you may just be, oh, today I'm just a climb out of bed and sit like a bump on a log and relax day. That's okay. But I think that the best thing you can do is always be in search of progress. How can I be better?
Awesome. Again, number 6, right? You always want to serve yourself. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your knowledge. And I know that we just scratched the surface of what value you can add. So I would definitely recommend everybody reaching out, getting to know her a little bit better, and then just everything else. So thank you so much.
Thank you, David. It was my pleasure being here today.
And today, as always, I wish everybody peace and love in their lives. Bring that into your lives. And when you're bringing a bat, make sure you hit your sweet spot. Just do the best you can. And if not, there's more than one at bat in the game. Have a great day. Thanks so much.
Well, my friends, today's journey has come to a close. I hope the seeds of peace and love continue to grow for each one of you. Remember, the peace and love surround you that will assist you to rise again. And don't forget to bring a bat for what you believe in. Namaste.